Hi, everybody. Welcome to our monthly hour of unstructured play.
I have some ideas that we can talk about.
I know some random geek will as usual will probably attempt to impose some structure, which is not unappreciated, but we'll see how successful he is.
Which is unusual for an anarchist. I mean, anarchy.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. I'm glad you pointed that out.
No. The thing is, that's why there's the A and the O, because it's anarchy and order. Because
I didn't know that.
Because the reason why the anarchism or anarchy has been tied to mayhem and chaos so often, well, it's because the state, because pro-state and pro-capitalist propaganda, as a word, they don't want people, those political elites and the corporate elites don't want people to think, wait a minute, they can structure society without us, without the hires, without us telling them what to do. We can't have that. And plus they'll be out of jobs simply, or they won't have the power that they would have. And so then that's why they always try to associate the word anarchy to mean chaos or mayhem. It is so pervasive as even in our entertainment. Yeah. I mean, Garrett on his glossary video plays clips from Star Trek series that shows that. And so
let's not forget Ghostbusters.
Yeah,
he says mass hysteria. He doesn't say anarchy, but it's
that's right.
And hysteria is sometimes also has some negative connotations as well.
So the circle around the A means order. I never knew that.
It means
that's an O. Yeah, I never knew that.
So it's A and O for anarchy and order. Because what we're against is hierarchies or coercive, unjustifiable hierarchies.
I see. So what you're saying is your dogged, determined attempts to impose some kind of order on these hangouts is not actually contrary to your anarchist leanings, but is actually part and parcel of the same.
Well, they're just suggestions as well, because I can't force any of these. I'm not going to mute these guys in the hangout. No, if they want,
I'll do that. No, I'm not going to do that.
Actually, he's just an attention seeker like the rest of us.
True. Speaking of which, my new T-shirt is my non-binary unicorn T-shirt, and yes. Steve, I told you.
You wore the Star Trek leggings.
And then Wonder Woman socks as well.
Wow, you're just all over the place in terms of.
I have one question for Geek though, because it was a little bit of a loaded expression, unjustified hierarchy, because there's a certain amount of subjectivity in that. So and that's the reason why I think the reason why I'm not an anarchist is that I feel that any effort to have because basically, I guess if you're for collectivism as opposed to real actual, I guess if you're pro-anarchy and not anti-collectivist, I guess that I could kind of see that. Although I have a question as how successful it would be, but I don't think that would be impossible. Whereas I think otherwise, I think it kind of runs the risk of that you said about that justification. Well, I'm sure in places where extreme like you say communist anarcho attempts have happened, and they've always failed because people have always justified, they found reasons to justify that hierarchy, even though you and I would probably think it was not justified.
Well, I'm not sure if there's any actual anarcho-communist societies. Definitely anarcho-syndicalist societies, where it's democratic confederacies, or I don't know if anyone has actually gone full-blown communist or something like that. But where's my train of thought going?
You weren't ready for this. You were showing off your Star Trek leggings, and then Joe just bombed you with these political philosophy.
His train got derailed.
That's okay. But hey, Joe was trying to bring him back to anarchism. But Chris, do you want to say something?
It's still going. It's just going towards a whole. But collectivism. Speaking of collectivism, I had the thought a while back of what if the Borg collective is just a sophisticated form of Facebook?
Maybe the twist is somebody needs to write that fanfic where it turns out the origin of the Borg is they're a future version of us from an alternate timeline where everybody got on Facebook.
Well,
and it was totally unregulated, and it just took everything over.
Oh yeah, oh look, they're shitting their pants, lol. Oh look check this out. I'm gonna cut a section out of their hole and just pull that out.
Here's the thing, though. I think that's an interesting idea, and that could make for good fanfic. Here's only one problem with it.
What?
I think Facebook is more destructive than the Borg.
Yes, I agree.
The Borg probably have fairer elections.
And probably considerably more mindless.
Because everybody's on board all the time.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah,
this
that's
is
hilarious.
something that actually kind of terrifies me. So, there's the Fermi paradox. There are numerous versions of that. But one theory some people have is that the reason no intelligent races have come to Earth to meet us, well, they're either ignoring us and they just treat us kind of like a zoo, just observing us from afar, or it is simply the fate of every intelligent species like ours to destroy themselves with climate change or nuclear war before they ever reach the stars. That once a species becomes intelligent, they use up all their planet's resources. They have corrupt politicians, a society like ours, and that is terrifying to me. I don't want to believe that.
Now, see,
I watch the weirdest porn. I gotta say.
I think I just think we're the Arkansas of the galaxy is where it comes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I tend to think that, assuming that the solution isn't that we're alone, which to me is the most depressing solution, I think it's probably more like I would hope that it's because the universe is just so damn big, and we just haven't heard from anybody yet. Even if there are. Yeah.
The problem remains distance. I mean, distance and the limitation of the speed of light.
Yeah, distances that are so great that, I mean, we can't even fathom it. Like, there's no analog in our everyday lives to how vast the distances in space are.
Right. And if you had a scale model of the solar system, you wouldn't be able to see any of the planets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and by the same token, you're talking about a Milky Way that's 100,000 light years across, which means that light we see from the other side of the galaxy was happening roughly about the same time that, Homo erectus was asserting itself.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it too, I mean, the other problem with Fermi's paradox is that Fermi assumes that any species that was capable of colonization would do so at the highest possible rate. And you think about it, just look at ourselves. I mean, we got to the moon and we had the technology to go to Mars for 40 years, and we still haven't gotten there.
Right.
And we can't get our shit together. And I don't believe that just, we can kind of have this kind of utopian view that, well, if people got to a place where they could have technology, where they could travel the stars, that they would have gotten over all the rest of their bullshit. And I'm like,
no.
Yeah.
We are only slightly less savage than the people 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So
well, you have to think about it in terms of even if intelligent life is fairly commonplace, it still probably only exists on a tiny fraction of all the planets that there are. And then the civilizations that would be capable of contacting us or doing something that we would notice is a tiny fraction of that. And then the civilizations that actually decide to do that would be a tiny fraction of that. So
you also have to assume that there's a chance that many planets that do currently have life are still in the primordial stages.
Right.
Just basic things like fungi and no complex life.
Or even if there's complex life, they could be less developed than us too. That's possible as well.
Yeah, we talked about that not that long ago. A difference of a couple hundred years, relatively speaking, might make the difference between being pre-industrial and being, nascent interstellar, transport communications, whatever else have you. And just a very small period of time, and it depends on how free the civilization is to develop. And of course, here I'm pointing a hard finger right at the church and the whole business of thou shalt not. The one thing, I don't know how many of you guys saw this. There was something that's maybe 4 or 5 years ago where I think it was either John Paul II or it might have been Benedict, but they said something to the effect of leave the actual Big Bang alone because that's sacred. You can come as close to it as you want, but and I'm sort of going, Seriously?
Yeah.
I mean, come
Well,
on.
I mean, it's rather convenient for them that the actual Big Bang may in fact be inaccessible to us anyway, just because of the nature of it, just because
exactly.
so they can say it's like the appeal to ignorance. It's that gap that Neil deGrasse Tyson said that religion keeps having to hide in as scientific knowledge expands. We may never actually know what happened at the Big Bang itself because our universe came into existence right after that,
and there's no mechanism to really study it.
Yeah, so maybe that might be like a gap in scientific knowledge that is just practically permanent that they can hide in and say, oh, that was the moment of creation. Okay, if that's what you want to say, that's fine, but it's convenient for you that we'll never know.
One story that I think would be fascinating. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
As far as contacting or being contacted by other species from other planets, we talk about that, couple hundred years. Well, you think about like we're broadcasting, radio signals, but actually the radio traffic is going down. And now that more and more things we communicate over cables. So our actually broadcast footprint is actually reducing.
And it would take a much bigger signature too to actually be seen, unless you had much more I was watching Space Time, and it seemed to me like even our signal, even our strongest signal, as far as it's gone by now, it would take really, really like more powerful detectors than we have to detect it.
Yeah, and consider the inverse inverse square law. I mean, the strength of the signal decreases as the square of the distance.
Yeah.
So by the time, I'm thinking about like contact, if they actually receive something at Vega, I mean, what are they looking? A couple of atto watts? Yeah. I mean, 1 times 10 to the minus, oh my God, watts.
Well, that's right. That's the thing. So intensity is going to drop very quickly.
Yeah.
And as our radio filter, so we're looking in a certain spectrum because that's what we use.
Mm-hmm.
But even we're not starting to use those less and less. So we don't even know what other people might be looking at. But I had like some wacky, thinking about like just like wacky things, like what if things are different than we think. And mine was that what if alien species used quasars or had somehow created quasars as navigational beacons?
Oh boy,
that would almost seem. That actually leads into something I was about to suggest.
Yeah,
here's what I think would be an idea for a story. I mean, well, first, the universe, is always expanding, so things are drifting further apart, and there are some things that we will just never be able to reach, that we might never even see because they're already too far away. But someday, that sheet will be spread so thin that the sky will be almost completely empty.
Right.
Like you might only see your own native star and a couple other stars, but anyone alive at that time might not even know that there was a wider universe out there. I think it would be kind of neat if there was a story.
That's actually been predicted.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually galaxy. You'll be able to see your galaxy, and that's
the local gravity will overpower will for quite a while overpower the effect of expanding.
Yes. Yeah. I think Carl Sagan had a thought like that, and I think it was in Cosmos where he said that we talking about our fortunate position, where not only do we happen to be, did we happen to be on a planet where our form of life can exist and we're able to evolve to intelligence, but also that we happen to come into existence during an epoch of the universe where it's possible to figure things out, where things are still close enough together that you can make observations and sort of work out how the universe is constructed. Because in a few more eons, when things are way more spread out, people might not be able to reach the same conclusions that we have.
They won't have they won't be able to find evidence that there's a universe beyond their own backyard.
Yeah.
Really. That's kind of sad.
And imagine the amount of evidence we've lost in the last 13 billion years if we had just that bit of information.
Right. We haven't found any population 1 stars, or was it population 3 stars? I forget which way around it goes. We haven't found the earliest stars.
Yeah. That's interesting to think about it, because we had our solar system and our galaxy had to be old enough to be able to produce us, but young enough that we could see everything.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one of those things that always makes me wonder whether the universe was actually designed, because one, we're young enough that we can see that there are other galaxies out there, and we happen to live on a planet that just so coincidentally happens to have eclipses. How many planets in the universe have those?
Yeah, I think it's just
one.
it's just that we're I think we lose sight of how incredibly fortunate we are.
Actually, as far as eclipses, we know eclipses happen all the time because we actually have detected them like on like moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Now Saturn's huge and Jupiter's huge, so it only eclipses a portion of the planet.
Right.
But the thing here, the moon only eclipses part of the and things that would be those moons are too small for a complete solar eclipse, but they're still there's still basically moons casting shadows on those planets.
Yes, but is the moon size and the sun size, it's the star size, such that you can see the corona?
Right.
That's
the same apparent size.
That was what we used to prove the gravitational lensing.
Yeah. Well, it's also how we can be fairly sure that ancient people even probably knew that the Earth was round.
Yeah.
The whole notion of like, well, everybody thought the Earth was flat until 500 years ago. That's just not true. And people probably knew even before Eratosthenes, because they were able to reason by looking at by seeing the moon and seeing the shadow cast over the moon and thinking,
In fact, we know that's the case because Eratosthenes was not attempting to prove that the Earth was.
That's true.
He was just trying to prove how big it was.
Already working in a paradigm where it was known, and he said, "Well, how big is the sphere? We know it's a sphere."
That's true. That's true.
And he made a damn good estimate of it as well.
Yeah, that's
plus
a good
or
point.
minus a couple 100 miles, I think.
In fact,
that's the thing. A lot of flat earthers don't seem to get. The Earth is really big. You're not going to be able to walk outside your house and see the curvature of it because it's so tiny that the patch you can see is just like this.
Well, I actually met one of those people. I'm so proud of living in Idaho. And I asked him, or the lower atmospheric flights that have like the rockets that you can make yourself that are go up high enough so you can see the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah.
He blamed that on optics.
Optics?
Okay.
The typical one-word explanation that says exactly nothing.
I don't like the optics of that explanation.
The funny thing is with Eratosthenes, not only did he relatively accurately calculate the circumference of the Earth, but he also may have fairly accurately calculated the distance from the Earth to the Sun. Basically, looking through his works, his notes and everything, it comes down to a translation. And depending on one translation, he came up with the answer then he would have come up with would have been like 67 million miles, and another one was like 92.
Right.
So he
which is like right on.
Yeah, I mean, considering what he had he didn't even have instrumentation. All he had was geometry.
Right.
Well,
it's pretty neat what you can do with geometry if you know what you're doing.
Well, what's really fun to me with flat earthers is the fact that they believe, they used to think that the Earth went actually under the flat disk. Of course, they realized that can't be the case because there's always somewhere on Earth where the sun. So now their model is that the Earth, both the moon and the sun, kind of do this, this flat orbit.
Has anybody here seen Cool Hard Logic's attack on quote flat-tards end quote?
Yes, it's a great series.
Some brilliant work with that.
What I want to know, Lauren, is two things. One, how could you ever get an eclipse in that model? And then two, if you came up with some bullshit rationalization for it. The thing is that again, simple geometry, how you saw the eclipse would look differently depending on where on Earth you were. Mm-hmm. So it would literally be different in every spot in the Earth, and it would be a gradient around the Earth. So, and that's not what we see. So it literally cannot be true.
Yeah.
Well, one model is that there's a black moon.
Yeah.
That we can't see.
Probably the most entertaining spin on the Black Earth belief that would probably make a fun movie if it wasn't such a problem in real life. Okay, when we hear like flat Earth, we imagine it being a disk floating in space, but that's not how a lot of them imagine it. They imagine that there is an ice wall around the edge of the world, and that above that is this endless expanse, and that God is out there physically waiting for us to go and find him, but the government doesn't want us to venture out into the wastes and find God.
Including all the religions of the world.
Yeah. That's what Michael Worley believes. Basically, Michael Worley's belief is a little weirder than that, but I think I've worked out that that's how he's able to be both a flat earther and a hollow earther.
Yeah, well,
because he believes the Earth is flat, but it's like a thick disc, so there's some space underneath it in the middle. And that's where hell literally is.
Michael Worley is on some really good drugs, is what he's going on with him. I'll tell you what.
He's just a bag of
communication from the word of God, and I must preach this word I receive in communications.
So he believes that God is baking a hell pie.
Yeah, exactly.
I just have one question about Michael Worley.
Okay.
What did Wilkes-Barre do to him?
That I wanted it. You know what? I wanted it to be. I didn't want to set it in Hagerstown. And I've been to Wilkes-Barre, and Wilkes-Barre is a lot like Hagerstown. So I wanted to set it in a place like that, like a place that it has you get the impression that it's kind of a declining community economically, but it's not like a total wasteland, you know. But it's like it's small, it's big enough to be a city, but it's small enough to be like a small town sort of thing. And it's just, I don't know, I just think it's funny that like there's the idea that there's this weird separatist Catholic church that thinks that their leader is like the rightful pope and is the vicar of Christ and the spokesperson for God on this earth, and his title is the Archbishop of Wilkes-Barre. Like that, I just find out it just incredibly amazing.
That's right up there with the Garden of Eden being in Branson, Missouri.
It's like, really?
Well, Yaakov up is there, so you never know.
It's not the worst place in the world, but seriously, this is where the humanity began. Okay.
The thing that's about the whole flat Earth thing is that, like, I remember 20 years ago, interacting. I actually wrote an email to like the Flat Earth Society, and at the time there was probably still like 50 to 100 people in the whole thing. And the guy who was in charge of it wrote back to me, and I was like challenging him, and he had a lot of the same bullshit stuff we hear from the others, but these were like fringe goons that everyone laughed at. And now there's millions of them. Yeah. So I remember like when Thunderfoot said, the internet is where religions go to die. I'm like, no, it just goes to find, some, maybe the old ones go to die. Some new ones that have popped up, and they're they're even creepier and flakier than the previous ones.
Yeah, I mean, the internet has a lot of places and a lot of corners for people to go into. And it's like, I'm still amazed that some people don't know about the existence of tentacle porn until I explained it to Christy Winters one time. The problem is like the third or fourth time I brought up that story. I'm sorry.
The problem is that not everybody knows how to critically think. And it seems to me the assumption that, well, the internet will be, the place where bad ideas will go to die, religious and otherwise. Yeah, it's like that only works if everybody knows how to critically think. And that's just not the case. And even those of us who make a point to try to think critically fuck it up sometimes. Like we're imperfect. We're not perfectly logical beings. It's not going to work that way.
Right. And then there's 4chan where it's just like you don't know who's making the original post and you don't know who's making the replies, so you don't know if they're arguing in good faith or the other people are just trolling you as well. And so
conspiracy theory type thinking is so attractive and so pervasive that it's not a matter of, well, just let everybody say whatever they want and the good ideas will rise to the top. I mean,
no, the popular ideas rise to the top.
Yeah, or the attractive ones, the ones that for whatever reason are the ideas that people want to hear.
It's naive to think that the bad ideas don't get traction because World War II happened. That's why they said never again. They said never again because they knew someday someone was going to try this again.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's like if you look at the Freeman movement, like if you remember, like they're all over the country, but they made a splash in Montana about 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about it was, I thought about like why groups like this start up. So you figure when you look at them, they're almost always from low education. They're almost always economically depressed areas. And so what would you rather believe? That you've been thrown over, the system doesn't really work for you, and that you are basically an ineffectual person who has no hope, or that's true, but it's because there's a conspiracy by certain people, and it's not that you're failing because you have no skills or any kind of thing like that. It's that someone's actively taking stuff away from you, and they're doing. And the funny thing is, they're not entirely wrong. It's just not at all the people they think are doing.
Yeah, right.
There are. Well, it's weird that like it's more comforting for people to acknowledge that there are certain flaws in important systems, but to believe that those flaws are there because of somebody's evil design, not because it just happened to work out so that it's a flawed system and we should fix it. It's that somebody did it that way on purpose,
right?
Like somehow that's a more comforting thought. Yeah,
because if it just worked out that way, I think that makes them feel less. I mean, it makes them feel hopeless, because at least if there is a bad guy, well, then all they have to do is defeat the bad guy and things will work out. Right. But if it's just by its nature that it turns out this way, what are they supposed to do? They can't do anything.
Well, plus the fact, if you think about it, if just say that's there's this conspiracy against them, but they know it, so they're in the know. So it's a way to elevate yourself. I'm not some simple ineffectual person. I'm a freedom fighter fighting against the big bad guys, which unfortunately are generally manipulated by those big
and examples of anti-Semitism eventually.
Yeah. So my
even though they've never seen Jews or been near Jews in their entire lives,
they've probably never knowingly met a Jewish person in their entire life. Yeah. Well, it's talking about how pervasive that kind of thinking is, and also to make this about me.
It's your stream,
which is a muscle that needs exercise. How do I make it about me? My next proper video on my channel is the first video I've ever done that is debunking a conspiracy theory about Star Trek. Because it's like there are even conspiracy theories about Star Trek, and it's like, now that I've been exposed to it, that's what I think. I'm like, well, of course there are, but it's like, why would anybody? Because like, if you're a conspiracy theorist and you believe that 9/11 was an inside job, or that the Holocaust didn't happen, or some other fucking like that, there's at least a gravity to that event that would make it think, okay, they're completely wrong, they're delusional, they're full of shit, but at least they're spending their time thinking about something that is important,
right?
And it's like there are people who make 30-minute, 45-minute, hour-long YouTube videos about conspiracy theories about Star Trek, and I love Star Trek, and I just can't imagine caring about it that much. And if you watch these videos, they're just like conspiracy theory videos about anything else. The pattern of thinking, the way they draw these completely wild, unwarranted conclusions and then treat them as facts. It's exactly the same, but it's about this totally frivolous thing, and it's kind of weird.
Well, that's what I get about the whole thing with flat Earth, because like you said, the 9/11, all those others. Even though there's nothing behind them, there's no facts behind them, but you can at least understand why somebody would do that.
Yeah.
You can understand the motivation to do something like that, even though that's not what actually happened.
Yeah.
But a flat, like why would everybody, and when the ones that try to say it's to deny God, I'm like, well, then how come all the major religions and even many of the minor religions are totally on board with this spherical Earth? You know what I mean? It's just, everybody's in a conspiracy to hide
If the conspiracy theory was true, it would be a big deal, right? Like if 9/11 was an inside job, if that's true, that's a big deal.
Right.
If Star Trek Discovery takes place in a different timeline than CBS says it does, So fucking what? Who cares? Even if it's true, who gives a shit? Like, why would you devote so much of your time to thinking about this? It just makes no sense to me at all.
One of my closer friends, he said he used to believe in every conspiracy theory until he tried to reconcile flat Earth and hollow Earth. And then
he had to pick one.
How do you have something that is flat and hollow? That's a trick.
Well, he didn't know about hell pie.
Yeah, it's the hell pie theory. The hell pie theory is the solution.
So wait, I think I missed something about these Star Trek conspiracy theories. I thought it was like conspiracy theories about the message in Star Trek and about the production, but you're saying there's conspiracy theories about the fiction.
Yes.
Of Star Trek.
Well, it's about both. It's both. It covers both. Okay, so this conspiracy theory that I respond to in the next video, it covers the fictional stuff and real world stuff. All of it is horseshit. There's no evidence for any of it. But the idea is that even though the producers of Discovery say that their show is a prequel to the original series and takes place in the same fictional timeline as the original series and Next Generation, yada yada yada, it actually takes place in a separate timeline that is like the original timeline but is different. And the reason it's different is for this convoluted issue with licensing and merchandising that, as far as I know, there's no evidence for it at all. But the whole reason that the whole motivation behind it is, well, that's why everything in Discovery looks so different, because it's actually made under this different license, and it has to be 25% different than the original series, which is based on a misunderstanding of a quote from a concept artist that has since been debunked specifically by CBS. So like it's both. It's like they're saying that the producers for some reason are lying to people about what fictional universe their show is set in. So it's completely, not only is it just incredibly silly, it's pointless. Like, even if that's true, why should I give a shit?
Yeah,
it doesn't affect what happens on the show at all.
I'll bet you money that you could trace a great deal of this back to the whole foofara between CBS and Axanar.
I don't know. I haven't heard Axanar mentioned specifically, but I think it's a misunderstanding about how it works between CBS and Paramount, right? Because CBS and Paramount used to be under the same corporate umbrella. They used to both be part of Viacom. And then in 2005, Viacom split into two companies. And one company was called CBS Corporation, which is a little confusing because the company that is now called CBS Corporation has most of the stuff that was in the old Viacom. So, but then the other company is a new version of Viacom, but is actually founded post the split. So it's just confusing. But Viacom owns Paramount Pictures, and Paramount Pictures used to own Star Trek. Now CBS owns Star Trek, but Paramount Pictures has the movie rights to Star Trek.
And you can't tell the players without a program.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little complicated. But as far as the rights to make movies, as far as I can tell, that's about as complex as it gets. Like CBS owns Star Trek, Paramount Pictures has the exclusive right to make new Star Trek movies. And that's it. So if Paramount Pictures wanted to develop like another Star Trek The Next Generation movie with the original cast, they could do that if they wanted. There's nothing legally to stop them because they have the movie rights to Star Trek.
Well, it's like kind of like Sony and Fox having rights to certain Marvel properties.
Yeah, exactly. And but because there's that split, there came this idea that, well, if Paramount wanted to make new Star Trek movies, they had to make it different than old Star Trek. And that's why like the Kelvin timeline movies were different. That's why it's in an alternate timeline, and that's why, you know, the characters are younger versions of the classic crew. And those were all creative decisions. That's just, they made the movie that way because they wanted to, not because they had to. But there's this idea that, well, no, they had to do it that way because it's the only way they could get the movie made. And it's just
the only reason why a decision that I don't like it was made because it had to be made, not because of some creative decisions.
Or because of the Jews.
It always, you know what? That's true. It's what Nicholas said. It always comes back to the Jews eventually.
If anything is a creative decision, the Jews are.
Anti-Semitism is at the bottom of every conspiracy theory. So I'm sure if they make enough videos, eventually there'll be like a Midnight's Edge video about how the Jews are responsible for Star Trek Discovery. Because it's at the bottom of everything.
The funny thing is, isn't there a Next Generation episode where like this didn't seem to matter back then?
Yeah.
Could have swore there was a Next Generation episode where Worf was like in this place with a bunch of alternate timelines and alternate
I don't remember the name of the episode.
And then at the end of it, he like legitimately goes to a different timeline. So everything before that episode is, you know, I could have swore that he ended up just on a very similar timeline.
Yeah,
I think he winds up in his actual native timeline.
He does.
But the point is, I think it's a good point, and like the irony of it, and is like the people who create Star Trek have always evidently cared way less about that than the fans have. It's not just a recent thing with Discovery. Like in Star Trek Voyager, they killed the original Harry Kim and replaced him with an alternate Harry Kim, and just went on like it didn't even happen. They literally killed the original character and replaced him with like the alternate version of him, and then the show just went on like it was the same guy. It was.
I think there was a Stephen Wright riff about that. How, you know, somebody broke into his house and stole everything and replaced everything with an exact replica. And his roommate, hey, what do you think about this? Everything's an exact replica, and his roommate goes, "Who are you?"
I might have to leave like 10 minutes early.
That's fine.
So if it's okay, they're just like two things I just want to put out real quick.
Yeah,
okay,
go for it.
So you don't have to make a trek actually about this. It's fine if you don't. I'm just saying it wouldn't surprise me if you eventually got around to it. The precursors. You know, this prior race that basically splooged in the oceans of a bunch of planets, and Klingons and humans and Romulans all look alike. That is always funny to me. I know a lot of people don't like that story. I actually like it quite a bit because it always has kind of bugged me that everyone in that galaxy looks the same. But,
I like that too.
The other thing I wanted to bring up real quick. Oh boy, speaking of anti-Semitism, who here is familiar with Attack on Titan?
I am.
I've never seen it. But,
it's a manga and an anime series. So the recent developments that I think Nick was alluding to is that in the manga that is ongoing, it's the government that the main characters fight against the Titans is basically is built full on fash. Complete with like similar looking Nazi iconography on the uniforms and stuff like that.
Oh, not just that, dude. This is a trip. I had no idea walking into it years ago that it could turn out this way. But okay, just first look at the very premise of it. You have these horrible monsters with their funny faces trying to bust through a wall. But okay, back in like 2011, 13, whenever the comic was made, that author couldn't have predicted Trump and all that stuff.
Right.
But recently, it has been revealed that all of the Titans were once humans. And they were just given some. However, only a certain race of humans can turn into Titans. The Eldians, who are, for all intents and purposes, Jews. And they're being oppressed. They're being oppressed by the rest of the world. And of course, it's framed as bad in the present because this generation didn't do anything. But this is following, if other characters in the story are to be believed, thousands of years of the Eldians using their Titan power to oppress all the other cultures of the world. Meaning that the anti-Semitism in this canon is completely justified and reasonable. That is fucked up.
Yeah.
Holy cow. They even have the stars and everything.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know, it's weird that I've encountered that trope twice in the last week. Once on Star Trek Discovery and once on the Orville. They both did stories recently where like an oppressor race was revealed to have been oppressed in the past, and then like they became oppressors in like an act of self-defense or so that they could survive. It's weird that trope keeps coming up. Like, oh sure, they're really bad now, but you know, they were really bad off a few thousand years ago, and you know.
Well, the aesthetic of the Ba'ul was just amazing.
Oh, the Ba'ul, the character design is like the scariest thing I've ever seen in a Star Trek show. It's like, Jesus Christ. What the fuck is that?
Even the ships with the creatures themselves, especially.
Yeah.
I want to see.
Yeah, they're pretty freaky.
One thing that I think it bothers me and it terrorizes me, but on the other hand, I also find it somewhat comical. When you are talking to somebody who has some form of bigotry and they're willing to say it because they don't think you have any connection. They think that because you don't have any connection, or at least they think you don't have any connection to that group, they become fine with their bigotry. And so, I mean, because I'm so fair skinned, and so people can't always judge what I am because I'm so mixed. People will say, a lot of anti-black stuff, not knowing, and occasionally, and again too, I'll hear a lot of anti-Semitism, and which I also don't cotton with, even if I wasn't 1/8 Ashkenazi, but I am. So sometimes it's almost funny, like, really,
like you're just fucking up left and right.
Open mouth, insert foot.
Yeah. It's a good example of, like if you do happen to be a bigoted piece of shit, like just keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, I mean, like,
except that they can't, Steve.
Yeah, I know.
They're always looking for a supposed safe space where they can open their mouth and just be assholes with no consequences. News bulletin. That's getting harder and harder by the day.
Yeah.
Right. I had a coworker who just we were just at the bar just talking, and I wasn't talking politics then, but then he said the T slur rhyming with granny, and so I spent 30 minutes talking with him how you just don't know, so you don't say that. And he said, hey, when I'm just with my buddies and we're just like hanging out, chilling and talking, I will use the N-word. And it's like, dude, if you do that, even if it's just with your buddies, I judge you for that. What? Yeah.
Well, it's like my grandmother used to tell me, and this is like it sounds really simplistic, but like if you get to the root of it, it makes sense as in a way of just a standard of behavior. Like you don't say things like that because it's just not nice. It's just not nice to call people those kinds of names. It's way more complex than that, but at the bottom of it, like you don't talk like that because it's just not fucking nice. Just don't be a jerk.
People need to hear the truth, Steve.
It has nothing to do with political correctness at all to say, hey, I don't want to hear those words around me. I don't want to be called that,
Yeah, exactly. It's just respect and decency. Like just don't be a fucking asshole.
But I was angry. This gaming moment. It's like,
I could tell. Look, I'm not a gamer at this point. I haven't played video games seriously for many years. But when I was a kid and a teenager, I played Nintendo like every fucking night after school. Never once did the N-word come out of my mouth.
Right.
As in frustration, I would never one time. And I grew up in a town and a home where I heard that word, and I can't honestly say that I never said it. To my shame, but I never said that's just not an excuse to be like, you should do, they're playing a game and it's this frustration and they just say it. No.
It's a free speech issue.
Well, it's funny because that's another, that's one thing that I think is kind of funny too. You said the people who are constantly yelling about free speech, which, they're fine with their speech. They always want to. Anyone who speaks counter to them, though, somehow think that's nothing. Like, no, that's how free speech works, asshole.
Yeah, exactly.
I call it a multi-lane highway. You get to say what you want to say. I get to say what I want to say about what you said, and you can say back. Other people can get in there. That's how it works. And so, unless someone's actually using force against you to take away your ability to say it, and you're not being oppressed. And it has nothing to do with political correctness, because what political correctness is, and I may have mentioned this before. It was, stations in the South that didn't want to play the episode where Kirk kisses Uhura.
Right.
Because, it wasn't acceptable for a white man to kiss and a black person, white and a black person to kiss one another.
No, in public.
In public, yeah, we Strom Thurmond, we see you.
Strom Thurmond. Joe Biden eulogizes that Strom Thurmond's funeral. Don't forget that.
The problem with that kiss was not so much that he kissed her, but he did it in public and that it was approved of by the network.
Yeah. Well, here's one thing that gets me too, because I've been doing a lot of genealogy. I've mentioned it before, and I've definitely found evidence of some of my formerly some of my slave ancestors that were mulatto, and we know how that happened. So the thing is, what gets me about it is, so I think it was around 1816 or so or 1812 that importation of slaves was banned in the U.S. But this practice of slavery didn't go away. Just you shouldn't bring in new slaves. I mean, other than black market, and that's what the Amistad was a black market ship. So it made the slaves you had very valuable, and of course, if you wanted to make money, and since you couldn't import new ones, the only other way was to make them yourself. So think about how fucked up that is. That basically people were raping their slaves and then selling their own children.
I have an addition to that as well, because I've been working on my genealogy, and I think there's some intersections between our genealogies, Joe. But the conversation I was having last night was, there's this idea, and it keeps coming up, it keeps getting reformed, but in the from before the Civil War until civil rights, there was this idea that the black men are coming to rape your white women.
Right.
Yeah.
And then if my family tree is any evidence at all, that never happened. It was always the other way around.
Yes. I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I found a census record, 1870 census, where one of my ancestors and her mother, so also, they were living with a white man, and both of them are mulatto. And so so I would bet money that, and also looking at the amount of European that's in my sister, because it's hard for me to tell because my mother's European ancestry, but my father is black, and looking at how much is in my sister, and I know where it came. I can actually name ancestors, and it's like, I don't doubt that it was one of those things where she was produced by that particular man, and and I'm sure with some arrangement, hey, stay with me and I'll take care of you, kind of thing. But people did, they did what they had to do to survive. But
yeah, a lot of people still have to do what they have to do to survive too. So more things change, more to stay the same in some cases.
It reminds me of the phenomenon that we have, unfortunately, today of like people of violence being directed against trans people. Where it's not like most situations where a cis man harms a trans woman, and the excuse is, well, I didn't know she was trans. That usually turns out not to be true. He did know that she was trans. It's just that he got mad because he didn't want people to find out that he had been with a trans woman. And it's this sort of thing where like the behavior is already fairly common. Just like with interracial, white people having sex with black people, that was not like an unusual thing. But it's just the idea of, well, we can't let people find out about it, we can't let it be legitimized.
Yeah, Steve, look at how uncomfortable people were made when the whole business between Jefferson and Sally Hemings came out. I remember that.
Oh yeah,
people were up in arms, and I shudder to think what the reaction was in the Deep South.
Right. and they weren't shuddering because the fact that the white man in power was potentially using force against the slave. It was, how dare you say that he was with a black woman?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well,
the whole miscegenation.
My point was that that it keeps repeating itself, and just as Steve said, where blacks and whites are now somewhat more comfortable with each other. Now it's the trans people, where again it's the trans people are now coming for your daughters. So again and again, it just changes groups.
Yeah, it's exactly.
It was the case before as well.
It's the brutalizers putting the blame on the people they are brutalizing for the kind of things that they do.
Because people,
I had to do it. It was just preemptively before they could do something. Because that we're going to. Why wouldn't we?
And I remember I called out somebody on I didn't really know her that well, but on Facebook, because she posted this this meme that had it showed someone that had got shot in the crotch with a tear gas grenade, and the caption was when your body doesn't like something like when your made up gender doesn't save you from a smoke grenade to the crotch. Something really, really fucking offensive. And
Charming.
I just said that's a very offensive thing to say, and like a very offensive thing to share. And we got into it. I tried to be very civil, saying, "Well, I don't really want to argue with you. It's just if you do something offensive, I feel it's important to point it out." But then later on, she approached me to try to ask me about outrage and like why do trans people feel oppressed? And I tried over and over and over and over again. In every word that I possibly know probably came up in that conversation, which lasted a long while. And by the end of it, this is just one fucking conversation that I had. How do trans people do this over and over and over again?
Oh yeah, well, that's the thing, and especially with that person you dealt with, you think about the mentality. So here they are, basically denying, they're total trans deniers. They don't want to accept anything about what trans people are saying about themselves. And yet, well, why do they feel oppressed? Well, because of you, asshole.
Yeah.
Why? Because you think it's funny that they're getting their genitals mutilated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
And the thing that kept coming up was she kept saying, well, women go through that. Well, yeah, but it's not a justice. It's not a fucking zero-sum game.
That we should do something about that too, by the way. Exactly. Like, it's like, well, those people over there have it bad too.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
That also sucks.
Here's the thing. I obviously I am against all forms of bigotry, but certain forms I understand, or I at least where they come from. I get sexism. I get racism. I totally understand. I mean, they're fucked up, but I get them.
Right.
Well, like gender, out of all like gender identity, and even like homophobia is really fucked up. I have a harder time with that one, but it's that fear. It's like I don't think the fear is that that guy's gonna touch me. Is like I think the fear is that they want to touch them.
Yeah.
But I think it's like gender identity. Like I tried to say this. I said this to a trans person I knew, and they didn't get what I was getting at, and they got a little upset, and they like to explain. And I said, nothing in the world means less to me than your gender identity. And what I mean by this, I have no stake in it. Yeah. So in other words, I'm perfectly happy to accept your gender identity because it doesn't fucking matter. Like things that matter, like I don't care what you call yourself. I'm happy to call you and address you and treat you however way you want to, because it doesn't fucking matter to me in the slightest. It matters a lot to you, just like my identity matters to me. So I wouldn't somebody else's identity matter to them. So whatever, I don't give a fuck. It doesn't cost me anything not to be a dick.
No, Joe, I'll drink to that.
It doesn't pick my pocket or break my leg.
It's to me, it's always been analogous to calling someone by their name. Like, if you tell me your name is Joe, I'm going to call you Joe. I'm not going to say, well, your birth certificate says John. Like, it's not my fucking business. I'll call you whatever if you tell me what your name is, I'll call you by that name.
And plus, people just don't know.
My favorite is I tell people, look, if you want me to call you a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater, I will do that, and I won't even demand that you fly.
Here's an example, like what Steve was mentioning. I mean, why don't these biological determinists go walk up to a foster family, and they go, "You're not really that kid's parents. That's just being politically correct. They didn't come from you."
Yeah, actually, I think ContraPoints brought that up as an analogy in her video about, I think it was the video about traps.
I have problems with that video actually.
Yeah, I know a lot of
good, but
people have certain. But there was an analogy she drew about, because people say well, trans women aren't really women, and she drew the analogy. What about adopted children? An adopted father is still literally really the father of that child, and you would only bring up the adoption if there was some issue specific to that. Right. Just like if you, there might be times where you need to specify that a person is trans or cis, but in everyday life, just interacting with each other, it doesn't really matter.
Right. By the way, is interesting. Okay, this is a bit of a side note, but in the past year, I saw a great movie about adopted family with Mark Wahlberg, Instant Family. I was touched by that because I was laughing at the movie. but there were moments I was crying, and in the final, towards the end of the movie, I was crying in the scene and laughing at the same time. So,
wow, that's a good movie.
Yes,
Mark Wahlberg.
Instant family, and yes, Mark Wahlberg. I mean, it's just I
always cry at Mark Wahlberg movies.
Another point about like back to the counterpoints of videos, I do have my mixed feelings about that. It's kind of similar to some of the mixed feelings I had for her aesthetic videos, but like I will say that her final point and the video, I hate the meme that she used, but I understand why she used it. Is that she said, "Why is it bad to be gay?" And that is an excellent point that I'd like to end it on. It's not bad to be gay, so stop with this game, like, is it gay? And with that connotation of like that, it's bad. Is that bad?
Well, it's like a lot of insults, you know, that especially people who are like anti-gay or anti-trans like throw around. It in order for the insult to work, it has to presuppose that the other person shares your prejudice.
Right.
Because if you try to demean something by calling it gay, like if you say that to someone who has no problem with gay people, it's like,
So I'm totally against people, you know, using things like that as slurs. Except, I think at the people who like that, I almost feel like you know, it's like, it doesn't mean, you know, skin off my nose, but it's like, hey, the fact that it bothers you, I want to make you uncomfortable. Being a douchebag.
I know just how to get at you. Yeah.
You know, I think homophobia is built into notions of what manhood is supposed to be. You know, the outdated toxic masculinity stuff.
Hey, we're in the last 5 minutes. Before we go, Lauren, did you want to give an update on the calendar situation we mentioned before we went on the air?
Yeah, I'd love to. I how much detail to go into as it comes to this, but I had some talk with my gang at the Northern Ohio Free Thought Society and put together a letter responding to the calendar and fired it off to the mayor of Bedford Heights. And I quote, "I have been a resident of Bedford Heights for the past 9 years. In that time, I have received calendars produced by the city, admittedly never paid much attention to them until now. Particularly, I had to note the page for December, which noted the 25th properly as Christmas, but the message at the graphic, which I showed you guys a couple of Hangouts ago, was pretty blatant. And I said, in paging through the rest of the calendar, I saw no mention of Hanukkah, Passover, Kwanzaa, or Ramadan. What I did see was a city document promoting one specific religion. In the message found in the first page of your calendar, you said you were proud to represent the city. In your position as a governmental representative, it is incumbent upon you to recognize the importance of the separation of state and church, and to honor that in all the actions you and your subordinates take. It is also important to realize that the citizens you represent are not just Christians. They may be Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hinduists, or Jains, or they may not hold to any God at all. As a non-religious American and a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, I see this calendar as clearly problematic. Any kind of advancement of religion by a government and using government funds for its productions is in clear violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. I should note that rulings regarding government support of such documents are rife throughout the court system, and in virtually 100% of cases, the judgments have been against them. Obviously, nothing can be done about the current calendar, but I would expect future versions to reflect the secular nature of our government and a religion-neutral attitude. I appreciate your attention and look forward to appropriate action." That was sent on 14 January. On 2 February, I got from the office of the mayor the following.
Oh boy.
"Dear Mr. Miller, I am in receipt of your letter regarding the City of Bedford Heights calendar. Specifically, you pointed out that the contents of the calendar for the month of December contains a message regarding the Christmas holiday from a Christian perspective. You have noted the importance of the doctrine of separation of church and state, with which I agree. I apologize for any discomfort that this publication has caused you or anyone else of other faiths or anyone who may not hold to a God at all." Note he's quoting my letter back at me. As you have noted, since it has already been distributed, nothing can be done about the current calendar. However, as you further suggested, it is extremely important that future versions of the city calendar and other city publications reflect the secular nature of the government of the city of Bedford Heights. To that end, I have asked the city's law director to prepare a memorandum directed to all city employees and officials, stressing the importance of religion-neutral content in the preparation and dissemination of city publications. I thank you for your letter, which will serve as a catalyst to avoidance of problems in the future. Game, set, match.
That's great.
Awesome.
No shit.
That's great.
And now here's the thing too, and this was pointed out by one of my associates at Northern Ohio Free Thought. I sent that letter on the 14th, and I'll guarantee it was in their hands on the 15th. They spent 2 weeks chewing on it, and then came up with that answer.
That's fantastic.
And one of the things he pointed out was that as it comes to activism, ain't nobody more active than FFRF.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in there swinging for the fences.
I'm so glad that they didn't. Yeah, you're right. You point out they took their time figuring out, I guess, presumably figuring out what to do. But I mean, I'm glad they didn't dig in their heels, because that you hear about that occasionally, especially with local governments, where they just basically say, we're still going to do it this way because who cares? Because like your letter was perfectly reasonable. You weren't like you didn't seem like you were trying to pick a fight. You were just pointing out what the problem was and what the legal backing that your side has. And
my nature as it comes to this, especially when I'm arguing religion, I love to lean on facts, and especially since we've got them.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to end the show on, because I'm so glad that it turned out that way, and hope it will be nice if in other parts of the country, when things like this come up, if it could be that easy of just someone writing a polite but strong letter to the government saying, "Hey, I noticed there's a problem here. Can we fix it?" And the government writes back and says, "Yeah, sorry, we'll fix it." Like ideally, that's how it would work. It doesn't always work that way.
Well, I mean, this is Cleveland, Ohio, I mean, this is the Cuyahoga County, Northern Ohio. I mean, we're not in the middle of a Bible Belt,
right?
And
that helps.
And it does make a big difference. I will tell you this: so come December, I'm going to be looking at that calendar. We'll
absolutely.
We'll see if the rubber meets the road.
Absolutely. I hate to quote Ronald Reagan, but trust but verify.
Exactly. Hell yeah.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up. We've been going for an hour and it's time to go. So it's weird that this is the show where I'm on the air with a bunch of other people, and it winds up being half the length of my Asked Away hangout. That was just me and was 2.25 hours. But anyway, so thanks everybody for joining me for this once again. We do this every month. If you're watching and this looks like fun, patreon.com/Steve Shives to help support the YouTube channel and help me continue to do what I do. And one of the ways I try to say thank you to my supporters is to do this once a month. So thanks to everybody for watching. Thanks to all of you for joining me as always. And I'll see you for this next month. Bye, everybody.